Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. Good evening, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and good evening to everyone joining the broadcast. Here are tonight's headlines.
More than a dozen heads of state and government from Jordan to Azerbaijan, Kenya, and the Czech Republic have used offshore tax havens to hide assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars, according to a far-reaching new investigation by the ICIJ Media Consortium.
Embattled property giant China Evergrande suspends trading in its shares in Hong Kong, pending an announcement on a major transaction as the firm struggles in a sea of debt and faces a difficult time.
North and South Korea restored their cross-border hotline, a step that Seoul said would help improve relations after Pyongyang sparked global concern with a string of missile tests in recent weeks.
And the COVID-19 risk classification of the Philippines and the National Capital Region remains at moderate level, according to the Department of Health.
First, more than a dozen heads of state and government from Jordan to Azerbaijan, Kenya, and Czech Republic have used offshore tax havens to hide assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars, according to a far-reaching new investigation by the ICIJ Media Consortium. The so-called Pandora Papers investigation, involving some 600 journalists from media, including the Washington Post, the BBC, and the Guardian, is based on the leak of some 11.9 million documents from 14 financial services companies around the world. Some 35 current and former leaders are featured in the latest vast trove of documents analyzed by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, or ICIJ, facing allegations ranging from corruption to money laundering and global tax avoidance. In most countries, the ICIJ stresses it is not legal to have assets offshore or to use shell companies to do business across borders. But such revelations are no less of an embarrassment for leaders who may have campaigned publicly against tax avoidance and corruption or advocated austerity measures at home. The documents notably expose how Jordan's King Abdullah II created a network of offshore companies and tax havens to amass a $100 million property empire from Malibu, California to Washington and London. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who has been critical of tax loopholes, is shown to have legally avoided paying stamp duty on a multi-million pound property in London when he and his wife Sherry bought the offshore company that owned it. Members of Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan's inner circle, including cabinet ministers and their families, are said to secretly own companies and trusts holding millions of dollars. In a series of tweets, Khan vowed to take appropriate action if any wrongdoing by the Pakistani citizens is established. Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin is not directly named in the files, but he is linked via associates to secret assets in Monaco, notably a waterfront home acquired by a Russian woman believed to have had a child with a Russian leader, according to the Washington Post. The Pandora Papers are the latest in a series of mass ICIJ leaks of financial documents, from LuxLeaks in 2014 to the 2016 Panama Papers, which triggered the resignation of the Prime Minister of Iceland and paved the way for the leader of Pakistan to be ousted.
In a related news, Prime Minister Imran Khan promised Sunday to investigate Pakistani citizens connected to a massive probe into the hidden wealth of politicians worldwide after members of his inner circle were implicated in the report. Now, Khan, who had run for office on an anti-graft platform, said global poverty levels were fueled by corruption in tax havens, which he said divert funds away from the general public. Now, he also slammed wealthy countries for not being interested in preventing this large-scale plunder nor in repatriating this looted money. One of Khan's predecessors, Nawaz Sharif, was ousted by the country's Supreme Court in 2017 over allegations made in the Panama Papers.
Meanwhile, Jordan's royal court on Monday rejected as distorted claims made in the Pandora Papers that King Abdullah II created a network of offshore companies to build a $100 million overseas property empire. It said that the reports included inaccuracies and distorted and exaggerated the facts, and that revealing the property's addresses was a flagrant security breach and a threat to His Majesty's and his family's safety. The statement also said that the king had personally funded the properties and all related expenses. While not alleging criminal wrongdoing by Abdullah II, the reports allege he created a network of offshore companies to quietly purchase luxury residences from Malibu and California to Washington and London. Jordan's Royal Hashemite Court said in its statement that it is no secret that His Majesty owns a number of apartments and residences in the US and the United Kingdom. This is not unusual nor improper. In most countries, the ICIJ stresses it is not illegal to have assets offshore or to use shell companies to do business across national borders. But such revelations are no less of an embarrassment for leaders who may have had campaigned publicly against tax avoidance and corruption or advocated austerity measures at home.
In other news, Japan's new Prime Minister Fumio Kishida unveiled his government today, mixing holdovers with newcomers after lawmakers voted him the new leader of the world's third largest economy. Now, the soft-spoken scion of Hiroshima political family, 64-year-old Kishida beat popular vaccine chief Taro Kono to win the leadership of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP, last week. He easily won Monday's vote in parliament, approving him as prime minister thanks to the party's commanding majority. Shortly after the parliament vote, Kishida's new cabinet was announced with more than a dozen fresh faces, but holdovers from the Suga government largely populating the most important portfolios. Both Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi and Defense Minister Nobuo Kishi will retain their jobs. As Prime Minister, Kishida faces a raft of challenges, from the post-pandemic economic recovery to confronting military threats from North Korea and China. He will also lead the LDP in general elections, which local media reported would be held on October 31st, a few weeks earlier than expected. Kishida's leadership campaign emphasized his plans to correct government missteps on the pandemic, including a pledge to unleash new economic stimulus.
Meanwhile, Philippine celebrity Mayor Isko Moreno on Monday formally registered as presidential candidate in the 2022 national elections, joining a crowded field that includes boxing legend and Senator Manny Pacquiao. Let's listen in.
Tanggapin niyo po ang aplikasyon ko. Buong kababaang loob. Ako po ay tumatakbong Pangulo ng bansa at aplikante ninyo. We are too divisive and indecisive that cause the stunting of our economy on top of the pandemic. Now, mga kababayan, bigyan niyo po ako ng pagkakataon paghilumin natin ang ating bansa para sa magandang kinabukasan na ating inaasam.
Mayor Isko's life has been an open book. He and his nanay Chayong lived as informal settlers in the slums of Tondo, Manila. Working as a basurero, the young Isko knew what it was to be dirt poor, but his being poor didn't become a hindrance to his going to school and finishing high school. After he became a counselor in 1998, Councilor Isko took the advice of his mentor and second father, Vice Mayor Danny Lacuna, and to finish college, which he did 6 years later. Mayor Isko and his vice presidential candidate, Dr. Willie Ong, filed their respective COCs before 12 noon today.
Staying here in the Philippines, Vice President Leni Robredo will decide this week if she will run for president. That according to her spokesman on Monday, after her arch rival and incumbent Rodrigo Duterte declared he was retiring from politics. Robredo, a vocal critic of Duterte's controversial drug war, would likely be the only opposition candidate in a crowded field in the May 2022 elections. Her spokesperson, Barry Gutierrez, told AFP she has not yet accepted the opposition coalition's nomination and will announce her decision before the filing deadline on October 8. Duterte, who is constitutionally barred from seeking a second term, had declared in August he would run for the vice presidency.
In other news, ousted Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi's health has suffered from her frequent appearances before a court run by the military junta that deposed her government. That according to her lawyer today. Suu Kyi went on trial in June, 4 months after she was taken into custody in a coup that plunged the country into turmoil. The 76-year-old faces a raft of charges, from sedition to illegally importing walkie-talkies, which could see her jailed for decades. She applied for hearings to take place every 2 weeks instead of weekly on the grounds of her health, according to her lawyer, Kin Mang Zhao, after her latest court appearance. After new corruption charges were brought against her last week, the Nobel laureate now must appear most weekdays at a courtroom in the military-built capital, Naypyidaw. The trial had left Suu Kyi feeling strained, according to Kim Mang Zhao, without offering more details. He added that the judge would make the decision on her request next week.
North and South Korea restored their cross-border hotline on Monday, a step that Seoul said could help improve relations after Pyongyang sparked a global concern with a string of missile tests in recent weeks. The two sides resumed communications with officials exchanging their first phone call since August, days after the UN Security Council held an emergency meeting over the North Korean missile tests. The two Koreas had signaled a surprise thaw in relations in late July by announcing the resumption of cross-border communications severed more than a year earlier, but the detente was short-lived as Pyongyang stopped answering calls just 2 weeks later. Seoul's Unification Ministry confirmed the phone call today, and it was this morning between officials from the two rivals. Now, the South's Defense Ministry also confirmed that cross-border military communications have resumed. North Korea had unilaterally cut off all military or official military and political communication links in June last year over activists sending anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border.
In other news, Russia said Monday it had launched a new hypersonic cruise missile from a submarine. The latest test of emerging weapons President Vladimir Putin has dubbed invincible. Now, Moscow has in recent years touted the development of weapons that it hopes will give it the edge in any arms race with the United States at a time of growing tensions with the West. Hypersonics can travel more than 5 times the speed of sound and maneuver in mid-flight, making them much harder to track and intercept than traditional projectiles. The military said today it had fired a Zircon missile from the Severodvinsk nuclear submarine and hit a test target in the Barents Sea in Russia's Arctic. President Putin used his State of the Nation address in 2018 to reveal new hypersonic weapons, including the Zircon, saying it could hit targets at sea and on land with a range of 1,000 kilometers. The launch comes a week after North Korea said it had tested a new hypersonic weapon, becoming the latest country to join the hypersonic arms race. Experts agree that for now, at least, Russia has an edge in their development.
Meanwhile, the Taliban said they had destroyed an Islamic State cell in the Afghan capital hours after a suspect is suspected IS attack on a mosque that killed 5 people. Now, the Taliban overran Kabul 7 weeks ago and have set up an interim Afghan government, but still face attacks from the regional branch of the Islamic State. The Taliban's chief spokesman, Zabihullah Mujahid, said fighters carried out the operation in the north of Kabul on Sunday evening. Kabul resident and government employee Abdul Rahman told AFP that a large number of Taliban special forces attacked at least 3 houses in his neighborhood. The fighting, he said, continued for several hours, adding the sound of weapons kept him awake all night. They said they were after Daesh or IS fighters in the area, he said. Now, the operation took place within hours of a deadly attack targeting a prayer ceremony at the Eid Gah Mosque in memory of Taliban spokesman Mujahid's mother, who died last week.
Meanwhile, Marines from the battalion that suffered casualties, 9 Marines and 1 sailor, that suffered 10 casualties, 9 Marines and 1 sailor, in the August 26 Kabul airport terrorist attack, returned to their home base of Camp Pendleton in California.
Yeah, for sure.
No, you're fine.
When the bombs and everything happened, I hadn't heard from him in hours, and so I know a lot of, like on the news, it said that a lot of people had already died, so it was just very scary to maybe not have him come home.
I feel amazing. I feel amazing right now. Honestly, feels like a dream come true right now, and I'm just thanking God. I thank God and praise God for bringing me home safely.
In other news, at least 8 people were killed in northern India Sunday after clashes broke out at a farmers' protest in a deadly escalation of their year-long campaign against controversial agriculture laws. The incident on Sunday in Uttar Pradesh state was the deadliest in more than a year of protests by farmers in northern India against new agricultural reforms. Farmers said that a convoy belonging to a government minister, his son, and the state's deputy chief minister ran over and killed 4 people at a demonstration. The minister said later that a driver lost control of his vehicle after being pelted by demonstrators. Angry protesters set fire to several cars, and at least 5 more people, 4 of them supporters of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party or BJP, were killed. Now, on Monday, the protesters kept the bodies of the 4 dead farmers in glass cases for display around the protest site. Police banned gatherings, cut off mobile internet services, sent extra forces, and detained several opposition figures on their way to the scene, including Priyanka Gandhi from the Congress Party.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by North Luzon Express Terminal.
Araw-araw sa panahon ngayon, may daming tanong kailangan ng tugon.
laban ng kwentuhan. Ang sigaw ng Pinoy Nation. Information, education. Ating saloobin, ipakita natin ang magsasasa problema natin. Ano sa palagay nyo? Ano sa palagay nyo? Ano sa palagay nyo?
Welcome back. Just a few weeks ago, Rutger Waisel was living an idyllic life with his wife and their baby boy in the Spanish Canary Island of La Palma. But now everything has changed when the island's Cumbre Vieja volcano began erupting on September 19. Now, this part of the island has already suffered forest fires in August that led to the evacuation of hundreds of people and destroyed homes. The Cumbre Vieja volcano has left at least 870 buildings of all types completely destroyed and prompted the evacuation of around 6,000 people. A new flow of highly liquid lava emerged from the volcano, erupting in Spain's Canary Islands last Friday, according to authorities, as a huge magma shelf continues to build on the Atlantic Ocean. Cumbre Vieja began erupting on September 19 and has so far spewed out 80 million cubic meters of lava. Canary's regional president, Angel Victor Torres, told reporters that volume was twice as much as neighboring volcano Teneguía unleashed in a 1971 eruption that lasted twice as long.
The British military started delivering fuel to petrol stations on Monday after a tanker driver shortage sparked 2 weeks of panic buying by motorists and emptied pumps. Now some 200 military personnel, half of them drivers, are taking part in Operation Escalin to alleviate fuel shortages in London and southeast England, worst affected by the run on the pumps. Britain's roads have been clogged by long queues of motorists at petrol stations for more than 2 weeks now. Frustrations have boiled over into anger, and violence has even broken out on some forecourts between motorists desperate to fill up, including with jerry cans and even old water bottles. Critics have blamed the chaos on Britain's exit from the European Union, coronavirus, and a lack of government planning to replace thousands of foreign drivers who have left the country. However, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said Britain's supply chain issues were a function of the world economy, particularly the UK economy, coming back to life after COVID. He also said Poland, the United States, and China were also experiencing driver shortages.
Now, back here in the country, the COVID-19 risk classification of the country and the Capital National Region remains at moderate level. That according to the Department of Health today. Let's listen in.
Nakikita nating nationally, naka-moderate risk case classification na lamang tayo. Nationally, ang ating 2-week growth rate ay sa negative 21%. Bumaba na rin po ang ating average daily attack rate to just 14.73 per 100,000 individuals. At para po sa Metro Manila, nakakita tayo ng mas malaki nga pong pagbaba sa ating 2-week growth rate na ngayon ay negative 33% na po. Subalit may kataasan pa po kasi ang ating ADAR na sa 26.64 per 100,000 individuals pa po tayo. Yung malaking kaso pa rin natin, sabihin we still have a fairly high number of cases, though unti-unti na nga po siyang bumababa, ay nare-reflect din po sa ating hospital utilization rates. Kaya ngayon po, both nationally at the National Capital Region, nasa moderate risk po ang ating utilization rate ng lahat ng COVID-19 beds. Para sa national, tayo ay naka 63.83 COVID-19 bed utilization rate. At para sa National Capital Region, mas mababa siya at 59.25%. Ang higit nating binabantayan ay yung utilization rate ng mga ICU beds para po sa ating COVID-19 cases. Both nationally at the NCR level po, naka-high risk pa po tayo. Sa national, naka 73.2%, at para naman po sa National Capital Region, 74.9%. Kaya naman ho, tuloy-tuloy ang ating panawagan na despite this decline of cases that we are seeing, kailangan ho yung ating pong mga preventive measures, ang ating MPHS ay tuloy-tuloy. Ikalawa po, yung ating paghihikayat na makapagpapakuna na po tayo. And of course, yung ikatlo po, no, yung ating tuloy-tuloy na panawagan at yung effective na implementation ng ating safety protocols, both at the local government unit and of course, our workplaces and establishments.
Staying here in the country, the pilot pediatric vaccination in the National Capital Region will be done through phases. Citing the approved guidelines for the pediatric age group vaccination to begin on October 15, Department of Health Secretary Francisco Duque III today said the inoculation of 15 to 17 years old will be done first, followed by the 12 to 14 years old group. Now, parental or guardian consent is needed before a minor can receive a shot, while the vaccination will be piloted in selected NCR hospitals to closely monitor the possible adverse effects. Minors with comorbidities will be prioritized at jab sites, Philippine Children's Medical Center, National Children's Hospital, Philippine Heart Center, Pasig City Children's Hospital, Fe del Mundo Medical Center, and Philippine General Hospital. The Food and Drug Administration initially approved the emergency use authorization of Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for the inoculation. National Task Force Against COVID-19 Chief Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. said pediatric vaccination was closely studied before approval.
In other news, U.S. fatalities from COVID-19 surpassed on Friday, according to the figures from Johns Hopkins University, a toll roughly equivalent to the population of the nation's capital, Washington. The grim threshold comes with an average of well over 1,000 people dying each day in a country where 55.7% of the population is now fully vaccinated, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. After a heavily criticized early response to the pandemic, the United States organized an effective vaccine rollout, only to see a significant portion of Americans still refusing to get the shots. The United States finds itself having notched the most fatalities in the world, far exceeding other frontrunners such as Brazil and India, and facing a resurgence in cases due to the prominence of the highly contagious Delta variant.
Now, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern admitted Monday that New Zealand's widely praised COVID-0 strategy had failed to halt a stubborn outbreak in Auckland and said a new approach was needed. Take a look.
As you can see, with this outbreak and with Delta, the return to zero is incredibly difficult. And our restrictions alone are not enough to achieve it quickly. In fact, for this outbreak, it's clear that long periods of heavy restrictions has not got us to zero cases. But that is okay. Elimination was important because we didn't have vaccines. Now we do. So we can begin to change the way we do things. But we cannot rush. That's why we need to continue to contain and control the virus as much as possible while we make our transition from a place where we only use heavy restrictions to a place where we use vaccines and everyday public health measures. Step 1, Cabinet has already confirmed, will come into place from tomorrow, Tuesday, 5 October at 11:59 p.m. Aucklanders will be able to connect with family and loved ones again, but only outside. The science tells us COVID finds it hard to spread outdoors. So from midnight Tuesday, Aucklanders will be able to meet another household outside with a cap of no more than 10 people at any given time.
Auckland will remain in lockdown for now, but the government will conduct weekly reviews to time the reintroduction of freedoms. City residents can meet outdoors in groups of up to 10 from Wednesday, and steps such as reopening shops and schools will be considered in the coming weeks. The rest of the country was allowed out of lockdown in early September. The national flag carrier Air New Zealand also announced it was introducing a no jab, no flight policy for passengers on all international flights from February 1st. Before the Auckland outbreak, New Zealand's elimination strategy was widely lauded by bodies such as the World Health Organization, with just 27 deaths in a population of 5 million.
Meanwhile, Beijing organizers said on Monday that the Winter Olympics face great pressure because of COVID-19 as China ramps up preparations with a series of test events. February's games could be the most restricted mass sporting event since the pandemic began, with no international spectators allowed and a vaccine mandate for anyone entering a strictly enforced bubble. Those who haven't been vaccinated, including athletes, must quarantine for 21 days on arrival in the Chinese capital before they go into the bubble. Olympic organizers will trial many of the measures in a series of domestic test events, international competitions, and training for overseas athletes that will begin on Friday and last several weeks. Yao Hui, venue management chief on the Beijing Winter Olympics Organizing Committee, told a briefing that they expect that over 2,000 overseas athletes, team officials, international technical officials, and timing and scoring professionals will come to China to participate in various competitions. China has virtually sealed off its borders to keep COVID infections out. But ahead of the test events, it allowed entry to participants that are mainly from Asia as well as Europe and North America. For example, athletes from China, South Korea, and the Netherlands will participate in the speed skating test events. Other events cover a variety of sports, including skiing, snowboarding, luge, bobsleigh, and ice hockey. They will take place in the three Olympic hubs, Beijing, Yanqing District, just outside the capital, and Zhangjiakou in neighboring Hubei province. Organizers said they will ensure that the test events are carried out using the same arrangements as the Winter Olympics. Unlike the Tokyo Olympics, the Beijing Games will have spectators, albeit only people living in mainland China. But the Winter Olympics bubble will be much stricter than it was in the Japanese capital.
Fully vaccinated travelers from any country can now book holidays to tourism haven Phuket. The Thai government announced that under tweaks to a struggling quarantine-free travel scheme. Now, Thailand's tourism industry has been on its knees with the coronavirus pandemic and related restrictions, slashing visitor numbers from 40 million in 2019 to a mere trickle over the last 2 years. Pre-virus, the sector made up a fifth of Thailand's national income, and travel curbs have fed into the country's worst economic performance in more than 2 decades. The kingdom launched a sandbox scheme in July, which allowed fully vaccinated travelers from countries considered low to medium risk to roam free on the popular beach island for a fortnight, and then afterwards travel to the mainland without quarantine. Last week, authorities cut the required stay to a week, in line with national changes to quarantine rules. The Tourism Authority of Thailand announced late Friday that the scheme had been broadened from around 80 countries already eligible. This means Thailand is now welcoming travelers from any country in the world to the Sandbox program, it said in a statement. Now, Foreign Ministry spokesman Tani Sangrat said unvaccinated children would be able to travel with their vaccinated parents. The Sandbox program has already lured more than 38,000 visitors to the white sands of Phuket and generated $66.67 million.
In other news now, Huntington Beach and Newport Beach, south of Los Angeles, are closed after about 480,000 liters of oil leaked into the Pacific Ocean, washing up on the shores, causing substantial ecological impacts, according to local authorities. Take a look.
Down by the pier, there's globs of oil everywhere. So it's not, it's not good. They had to close you couldn't even go in the water.
I still can't believe here we are in 2021 and this is happening. I think that's the main reason why I came here to witness. It's a tragedy.
Now, the spill started at around 9 a.m. local time on Saturday, according to the Coast Guard. In the pre-dawn hours of Sunday, oil and dead animals had begun washing up on Huntington Beach, a city of around 20,000 for around 200,000 people, located about 40 miles south of Los Angeles, according to Orange County Supervisor Katrina Foley. At a press conference Sunday afternoon, officials warned residents not to touch or to try to save any wildlife themselves, but to instead call local authorities to alert them to animals affected by the oil. It wasn't immediately clear what caused the spill, from what authorities said was a pipeline breach connected to an oil rig offshore. An investigation has been launched into the incident.
Back here in the country, where the Philippine National Police's search and rescue operation capabilities got a boost after it received almost 39 million pesos worth of disaster response equipment from Japan. PNP Chief General Guillermo Eleazar, together with Department of Interior and Local Government Undersecretary Bernardo Flores Jr., personally accepted the donation from the Japanese ambassador to Manila, Kazuhiko Koshikawa, in Camp Crame today. The donated vehicles and equipment amounting to 38,944,564 million pesos includes 3 rescue vehicles, water purifier, portable movable toilet, collapsible tent, lighting apparatus, lifeboat, personal rescue equipment, and search sound detector intended for search and rescue operations. The donation is part of Japan's non-project grant aid for the provision of Japanese disaster reduction equipment and is funded by the Japanese government's Economic and Social Development Program, worth 2.5 billion Japanese yen, or around 1.1 billion pesos. Now, these equipment are expected to contribute to saving more lives and reducing the cost and recovery time in the aftermath of calamities.
World tourism surged in July thanks to vaccination rollouts and fewer travel restrictions, but traveler numbers still fell short of the pre-pandemic levels that, according to the UN's tourism body. Some 54 million tourists crossed international borders in July, the highest figure since April 2020, in the early months of the coronavirus crisis, according to the World Tourism Organization in a statement. Now, that represented an increase of 58% compared with the level recorded in July 2020, but was still a drop of 67% from the 164 million recorded in July 2019. Spain, which before the pandemic was the world's second most popular tourist destination, on Monday said it welcomed 15 million tourists in the first 8 months of the year, a decline of 4.2% from the same period last year. That, according to the National Statistics Institute. In the first 7 months of the year, Asia and the Pacific continued to see steepest declines, with a drop of 95% in international arrivals, followed by the Middle East, where numbers were down 82%, Europe and Africa, which registered a fall of 77%, and the Americas, which sustained a drop 68%. The UN body said it was expecting to see a rebound in 2022, although global tourism isn't expected to reach pre-pandemic levels until 2023 or 2024.
A resurgence of global economic activity has lifted merchandise trade above its pre-pandemic peak, that according to the World Trade Organization today, as it upgraded its 2021 and 2022 trade forecasts. The global trade body said the WTO is now predicting global merchandise trade volume growth of 10.8% in 2021, up from 8% forecasted in March, followed by a 4.7% rise in 2022, up from 4% previously. The strong annual growth rate for merchandise trade in 2021 is mainly due to the collapse in 2020 when trade bottomed out in the second quarter. The rate of growth is expected to moderate as merchandise trade returns to the long-term trend it was on before the COVID-19 crisis struck. WTO experts said supply-side issues such as semiconductor scarcity and port backlogs may strain supply chains, but are unlikely to have large impacts on global aggregates. They said the biggest downside risks came from the pandemic itself.
In other business news, embattled property giant China Evergrande suspended trading in its shares in Hong Kong today, pending an announcement on a major transaction as the firm struggles in a sea of debt and faces a default. The halt came as reports said Hong Kong real estate firm Hobson Development Holdings planned to buy a 51% stake in Evergrande's property services arm as the troubled giant tries to offload assets to meet its obligations. Trading in Hobson was also suspended pending the release of announcements in relation to a major transaction, according to a company statement to the exchange. Bloomberg intelligence analyst Patrick Wong said the suspension may be related to a major asset disposal or capital restructuring. Officials of the firm been struggling to deal with a crisis that has left it more than $300 billion in debt, fueling fears of a contagion for the wider Chinese economy that some warn could spread globally.
The local stock barometer started the week higher as overseas investors continued to worry about China's real estate developer Evergrande issue. But the peso ended the day sideways against the greenback. Luis Limlingan, Regina Capital Development Corporation head of sales, said Philippine shares were traded higher as investors sought refuge from regions being sold down due to the Evergrande debacle. Limlingan said among the factors that will play a part in the week's equities trading include U.S. trade balance data, jobless claims report, and unemployment rate. He added that onshore factors are the September inflation report and the August industrial production data. The Philippine Stock Exchange Index rose by 0.54% or 37.29 points to 6,960.89 points.
And Christie's Auction House unveils the diptych version of Banksy's well-known Girl and the Balloon artwork, which will be the highlight of their forthcoming sale in London on October 15th. Take a look.
You know, of course, Banksy is the king of the streets. He's almost a bit like the Robin Hood of the art world. In 2002, Banksy used this image in Shoreditch outside a printing shop. It appeared on a wall. Then a couple of years later, it appeared on the South Bank. And, you know, of course, Banksy is the king of the streets. He's almost a bit like the Robin Hood of the art world. In 2002, Banksy used this image in Shoreditch outside a printing shop. It appeared on a wall. Then a couple of years later, it appeared on the South Bank. Another little girl with another balloon. And then in 2005, he created this diptych edition of works with the girl with the balloon. So it's become something of a leitmotif for Banksy, and it's very, very celebrated. He manages with these images to create a sense of feeling. He manages to capture the essence and the mood of the moment. I think after 18 months of long pandemic, really this sense of hope and aspiration that you have with this little girl letting go the love into the world as she lets go of the balloon, it's what we absolutely need at this moment in time.
And as the two-part or diptych canvas depicts a small child letting go of a heart-shaped red balloon and was painted by the elusive wall dauber in 2005. It's also expected to fetch up to 4 million euros or 4.7 million US dollars when it goes on sale on October 15.
Now, Australian broadcaster ABC releases footage of a crocodile leaping out of the water and attacking the TV station's flying drone. Watch this.
My name's Dane Hurst. I'm an ABC camera operator. I've been working on a crocodile documentary for the ABC. So I got the drone up over a small lagoon at Crocodile's Park, and all the crocs were really skittish. But there was one crocodile in particular that was holding its ground and really eyeballing that drone. I thought, great, I'll use this fellow. He's in a stationary spot. I can get some decent shots of him. I lined the drone up and moved over the top of him, and as I was doing that, I looked up towards the lagoon and saw a crocodile vertical out of the water and heard the great clamping noise of a crocodile's jaws coming together. And looked down at my controller, and sure enough, it was blank screen and no connection. I thought, oh wow, that was a brand new drone. This is going to be a really hard one to explain to the boss. This is the drone in question. The way we got this drone back was because the crocodile went and fished it out. And luckily for me at the ABC, we've got some very clever technicians. They managed to retrieve the footage.
Those crocs are really fast. It's so scary.
I know, and I'd probably be doing the same if someone's taking a drone shot of me in my private space. Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. The news continues tomorrow. I'm CJ Hero.
And we'll see you back tomorrow. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live in interesting times.